1. Welcome to the Gut Mind Collective podcast, a show that helps busy women develop sustainable, nourishing health habits so you feel calmer and more energetic. I'm your host, Meryn Padgett, sharing guided meditations, gut mind health hacks, and interviews to inspire you to put yourself first and lead a purposely healthy life. This podcast is produced in my home studio, so you may hear the ambience of my neighbourhood. This raw and natural state is something that we think needs to be treasured. So let's get on with today's show. I am so excited to be joined by Ashley Berry today. We met on Instagram and connected over animal cards, and I'm so grateful that the animals brought us together because I've discovered a really beautiful and warm and genuine person. Ashley is an intuitive card reader and coach, and she helps people who want to develop a deeper connection with their mind, body, and spirit, and create lives that are authentic and aligned with their passions, purposeful, and their well-being is nurtured. In her card readings and her work as a coach, she encourages people to tune in more deeply to their body and subtle senses. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's awesome to have you here. So before we dive into the topic of intuition, I thought we'd kick off with a few getting to know you questions. And the first one, I don't know if I was asked this, it'd be a bit difficult to choose, I think. If you had to choose between the ocean and the earth, what would it be?
It is a difficult one, and I'm really lucky because I live somewhere that is kind of a meeting of the mountains and the sea, and kind of, we've talked about this on Instagram before, that the landscape I live is kind of a little bit of everything, which is really special. But as someone who tends to need a lot of grounding, and as my sun sign is an earth sign, and I really resonate with that energy and feel that it's very deeply healing for me, I'd have to pick earth. In particular, landscapes where there's red rocks, there's something just deeply healing about those landscapes for me. So I can't really imagine not having access to those.
Oh yes, yeah, it would be. I love your response because the earth is so grounding, especially when you have it as your native sign, leading the way in your chart. So thank you so much for that. So where's your favorite place to holiday?
Anywhere tropical, really. Which is funny coming off of that last question, because I think when you think tropics, you kind of think of ocean landscapes.
Yeah.
My early childhood was in the coastline of Texas, in a suburb of Houston, and the climate there is not quite tropical, but almost. I grew up with banana trees in my backyard, and there's something about that climate that just immediately puts all of my senses at ease. I feel my muscles soften. I feel like I just breathe more easily, and it just feels like home to me. So
Absolutely. And there's something, I don't know, it's almost like palm trees do help you feel like you're on holidays too. Yeah, awesome. Great response. So, self-care is kind of important for people who are giving to others. I mean, it's important for everyone, but what's your number one self-care ritual?
Oh, gosh. There's so many that I can't imagine not using regularly, but I think the most simple one that is, especially when I feel like I'm coming up against some rougher edges in life, or I feel that I'm struggling, or that my baseline is dipping a little bit, just going outside and lying on the ground. And if I can get a little patch of sunlight, I have to be really careful because of my complexion. I don't really have any tolerance to sun, but I'll put on a big wide brimmed hat and a thin long sleeve shirt and just let the warmth of the sun just soften my
Mm.
being. And it's, to me, it just feels like that energy of the sun is so nourishing and revitalizing for me. So
Mm.
yeah, and it's just a simple thing to do, but I do find that when I'm really feeling frazzled, if I can just go sit outside on the ground in some sun for just even, 10 minutes, it can make a huge difference for me.
I love that. I love that idea. Yeah, vitamin D is so essential. I mean, for absorption of calcium and nutrients and that sort of thing. And you've got to be careful with skin cancers and things these days, especially in Australia. Yeah, it's quite prevalent here. But I love that idea. And you do feel when you're out walking or something like that, and if the sun just glimpses through the trees, there's this presence that almost is there for you. So beautiful. Thank you so much for that.
Of course.
So I know that you studied to become a psychologist, which was so exciting for me to learn because I have an interest in psychology. And then you felt drawn to the principles of holistic coaching, which really, I was really intrigued about this as well. And I'm wondering, was this kind of the awakening of your intuitive gifts, or has it kind of been there for your whole life from a young age?
It's interesting. I would say that the answer is both, actually, in an interesting way. I was a very sensitive child. Uh, I don't think I realized that this wasn't typical. I thought everyone experienced life in this way when I was young, but I would feel the emotional states of others very intensely, and was just very empathic. It was almost too easy for me to attune to the needs of others
Mhm.
and what was going on with them, and that's actually been a big learning process. And I know we may end up talking about boundaries at some point, but that brought me to really need to learn that practice, as someone who's very sensitive. Uh, and I grew up with a very complicated family situation,
Mhm.
with several close family members who had some mental health issues. And so I think that really led me to be curious about psychology and want to really understand uh, what what shapes how people function and how they view the world and how they um, relate emotionally to things. And I, over the course of my studies, I loved the coursework that I did, and definitely very much value traditional Western forms of psychotherapy. But as I was doing my clinical practicum, it felt very limited. There were things that I wanted to be able to share with my clients or discuss with them that, at least in the framework that I was being trained in, it wasn't considered appropriate.
Mm.
It was considered out of scope. And at the same time, I was very ambitious in my program, and I took on some very intense cases for some of my first clients.
Mhm.
And this was, when I say it was both, this was the period of time where I realized that my sensitivity levels were a little bit different than many other people. I really started taking on a lot energetically from my clients. And part of the reason why I left my program is I wasn't, uh, I didn't have the tools yet to take care of myself. And I
Mm.
was really great in session with my clients. And at home, I was really struggling.
Mm.
And so, and I was quite young for my program. I was 25, 26 at the time, I was one of the youngest in my program. That's kind of unusual to be that young, pursuing marriage and family therapy.
Mhm.
But it it was a blessing in disguise because I felt sort of pushed out in a certain way because my body wasn't tolerating everything that I was taking on. And at the same time, I was working with alternative medicine practitioners for some health issues that I was dealing with.
Yeah.
And it was really new to me. I grew up in a family where my father was a doctor and my mother was a nurse. So Western medicine wasn't necessarily worshipped, but I very much trusted Western medicine and felt like all the answers were there.
Mm.
And at some point, I hit a dead end seeking solutions around some of my own personal things. And I hear people say this a lot, but almost out of desperation, I started going to alternative practitioners because I just felt like I'll try anything at this point.
Mm.
And that was a huge learning process for me too, because I think some of the downside of Western medicine is the quickness to pop a pill for every problem rather than coming to learn the intricacies of our systems and our systems as humans in general, but our own specific systems and how they're unique. And so that was also a big process of starting to attune to myself. And I think the combination of all of those things happening together helped me realize that my sensitivities, which were cropping up in some health challenges, were gifts, but that they also required a certain amount of care and respect. So
Mm. And self-care and boundaries would be critical to that. I
mhm.
can imagine. Yeah, I'm knowing now what I know of, because I did a holistic counselling diploma 14 years ago, and I haven't really like used it in a completely professional context. I use it in day-to-day life. Carl Rogers's person-centered theory is, what I really align with. The three sufficient conditions of congruence, empathy, and non-judgment to allow the awakening of gifts from within the person who you're assisting. But boundaries, it seems key. So back when you were working with those cases, and these sensitivities were arising, did you have a way of managing that self-care, or was it really a journey to go through what you've had to go through and like learn what you've learned now to then be able to develop your practice of self-care?
It was definitely very much a journey. At that time, my coping skills were pretty poor, to be honest, and I was very high functioning, and I don't think anybody who was in my life in not a very close way would ever have known. And my two supervisors in my program, I had a group supervisor and an individual supervisor who were supporting me with my cases, um, who I adored, and really they were wonderful mentors, but they really were encouraging me to stay on. And because, because of my childhood, I was very good at kind of holding it together,
Mm.
right? And looking like everything was fine and very much internalizing. Uh, and I think that combined with some of the alternative work I was doing with healers uh, led me to realize how important lifestyle factors are, um, and and how far ranging that is, from the networks of people that we surround ourselves with, to what we're putting in our bodies, to the way that we're attending to our minds, to having outlets for stress,
Mm.
um, to self-healing practices. And it was many years of sort of trying different things and finding what worked for me. And some things I found very intuitively. I learned how to work with my own breath. Um, and that was something that sort of happened naturally as I dealt with anxiety
Mhm.
and started finding that, you know, I think I had heard somewhere along the way, take deep breaths, that will help. But I started developing these patterns of breathing, which later on I found, other people had done these same things too. But there's a beauty with working with the breath in particular for anxiety, is that it's accessible to anybody.
Yeah.
And you don't, it's not, there's no cost. It's just practice. So, and when I ultimately left my program, I had a huge life shift, and I moved cities, and I was sort of clean slating my life, and didn't know what I was doing with myself. And I started working out at the same time every day, just to have some sort of grounding. And prior to that, I had always been kind of naturally thin, and never had to. I had grown up believing that working out was for maintaining weight, and it wasn't something that I had to do. So I just didn't really do that. And I did it. I started working out regularly as a way to ground myself, and found that the benefits were huge. And it wasn't about weight loss for me. It was about helping support my mood, and um, balancing those hormones, the stress hormones for
Mm.
me. And so, it was just a process of adding piece by piece, and then the more I started working out, I got curious about nutrition
Yeah.
and started reading more about that, and how to fuel my body so that my workouts were um, potent and effective. And
Mhm.
it was just sort of a domino effect. The more I explored, the more I would find. And I do find that it's just endless, the amount of things that are out there to study and learn about. And
Mm.
that ultimately led me to studying energy healing, which was really something I had never thought. I was always curious and intrigued by that, but it was never something that I thought I would personally have any capacity to do.
Mhm.
And so it's just been this kind of beautiful, very organic process. But I will say, as someone who came to that from a place of really struggling, it wasn't a straight line at all. And there were a lot of two steps forward, one step back, and healing one area of my life, and then finding other things, habits sort of crop up, and having to go through the layers of what was underneath that. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
Absolutely. And, as Joseph Campbell says in The Hero's Journey, you've got to have that transition from one identity to the next in order to have that transformation. So s- the journey is a whole evolving process. And yeah. And so when you moved cities, and did your clean slate, was that when you started? Is that when you started studying integrative nutrition, or had you already commenced that?
no, that actually came quite a bit later.
Ah,
Yeah,
you were
that was.
creating all of these little pockets of knowledge
Mhm.
intuitively. Oh, I'm getting tingles on this one. That's amazing that you're just following your instincts of what you needed, and then it's
It
led.
it was, and when I moved cities, I left my program. I really didn't have a plan B for what I was going to do, and I took on some just part-time work at a bed and breakfast.
Mhm.
And really, I took a job that I knew would be sort of straightforward, and that I could leave at work every day, so that I would have that space outside of work to continue exploring what was next for me.
Yeah.
And I always call that job kind of my chrysalis job, because I was there for several years, and it was such a supportive environment for me to um, grow myself outside of work as well. And so during that time, I just started exploring what my interests were, I started writing a lot, which was something that was always part of my life. But I guess I had seen as more of a hobby. I journaled a lot as a way to process. That was another tool that was very natural for me that I did actually as a child when I would feel very, very overwhelmed. I had diaries and I would just pour everything out into them.
Mhm.
And I would say during that time after my move, I realized that in and of itself was a gift, that a lot of people around me started telling me, that's amazing that you can just access that and just write it. And to me, I thought, well, anybody could do that. And I do believe anybody could choose to, but it was something that came very naturally to me.
Mm.
I ended up pursuing writing, copywriting for work, and found my way into a job where I was copywriting for a wellness brand.
Uh-huh.
And through that, the I got curious about supporting people in making lifestyle shifts around wellness. And it was sort of a light bulb for me because um, I had never stopped loving the aspect of supporting people as I was pursuing that as a therapist.
Mm.
But I think because of some of my own background factors, working with people with very severe psychotherapeutic issues and diagnoses was something that was not what was best for my soul and my nervous system.
Mm.
And that I had never really considered coaching before writing with this wellness brand, and that sort of opened just the possibility of that up for me. And it sort of clicked for me that, oh, I can still work with people in a supportive way, but it doesn't have to be people who are in deeply, deeply fragile states.
Mm.
I can work with people who may be going through things and going through life shifts and wanting to make positive changes in their lives, but who are wanting to take on. I guess the thing with psychotherapy is, and depending on, there's so many different branches, but in the vein that I was training, my job was really only to reflect
Mhm.
to my clients and to mirror back what they were saying, and so to share suggestions or invitations for making life shifts weren't appropriate in those in that particular vein of clinical work.
Yeah.
And so with the holistic health coaching, that was available, being able to see people actively make shifts, uh, to me felt much more tangible and fulfilling, and to have that much more interactive relationship with a client where it was very collaborative,
Mm.
felt like a sweet spot between my interests and my gifts, and then what I need for me out of a work life. So
Mm. I can completely relate to the notion of finding a modality that really aligns with your core drivers and allows your gifts to unfold.
mhm.
And yeah, it's great that you've been able to find that. And do you have tips that you share with your clients as a way to be able to tune into their own intuition?
I think the biggest thing that I encourage people to do is start to incorporate body awareness practices. And those are really unique to each person depending on what's going on for them. Um, I would say overall, I find that my clients tend to either be divided between people who are more prone to dissociation
Mhm.
or are more what I call antennas, where they're so hyper aware and sensitive to everything around them that it floods their systems. And so,
And your psychology training has probably given you an amazing grounding in being able to identify this too.
oh, absolutely. And it helps me be really clear about my scope of practice as well, because I'm really clear. It's very easy for me to identify when something is at a place where it really requires psychotherapeutic intervention. And I'm really clear with clients about where my boundaries are, about what I feel
Mhm,
appropriate
mhm.
supporting them with.
Yeah.
Um,
So antennae, sorry, I totally interrupted, but I
oh,
just
no.
had a
Yeah.
antennae and disassociation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And and I find so for my clients who tend to be the more antenna types, for them it's really grounding practices. It's you know similar. That tends to be more my typology. Is kind of an antenna,
Mhm.
and so things like I shared about lying on the ground and practicing working with your breath and tuning into your own core and uh, cultivating what feels like a sustainable rhythm or frequency for yourself internally,
Mhm.
um, and and practicing releasing some of the extra stimuli that a lot of times we bring on, and especially for people who have upbringings that were chaotic. I think
Mm.
many of us can be prone to recreate that in our lives and feel almost like um, almost like life feels boring if it's not overloaded or overstimulating.
Yeah.
And sort of recalibrating in
Mm.
that way, and starting to notice, does this feel exciting, or is this overload? Am I losing the ability to be in touch with what I need? Am I losing the ability to uh, keep an even breath, or things like that that are sort of good indicators?
Mm.
Um, and then for my clients who are a little bit more dissociative, uh, and maybe a little bit of checked out of their lives, those are the clients that a lot of times will come to me and say they just feel disconnected from everything in their life. They don't feel like almost like their life isn't representative of them, and it's
Mhm.
uh, and those are the people that I will often have do, again, practices that maybe seem kind of strange, but self-touch practices where they are starting to practice feeling their own body and getting in touch with what feels good to them, and um, also uh, vocalization practices,
Mhm.
because a lot of times when people are checked out, there's a way where they've been taught not to take up space. And so if you're not meant to take up space, you're often not supposed to have needs, in which case it makes sense to disassociate, right? Because if if you aren't able to get your needs met, why feel them?
Mm.
And so starting to, even I'll have clients just tone to start.
Mhm.
So if they have space in their home, to just, when they're walking around their house, just make noises that feel resonant for whatever their emotional state is.
Mhm.
And it can help them start to connect up in a way that is not so cerebral. So, if they're having a sad day, to make mournful noises. If they're having a moment where they're feeling really irritated and angry, even if it's just passing, to start practicing expressing that.
Mm.
Um, and also things like journaling practices, I think, can be helpful for people who aren't quite ready to do some of those. For some people, the things like toning and stuff feels really awkward. They're not quite ready for that.
Yeah.
And I really, all of my work with my clients is completely client led. Everything I tell them is an invitation,
Mm.
um, and that they're welcome to take what speaks to them and leave what doesn't.
Mhm.
I really, more than anything, want clients to uh, come to really feel that they're the authority in their lives.
Mhm. And I mean, that's how you create that lasting change for yourself, isn't it? You need to be um, an agent with the person who's supporting you, but actually just fully engaged in the process so that you get the most out of it. Yes, you can engage in a certain amount of sessions with somebody, or buy a program, but that self-sustaining of the knowledge and the journey really happens when you are fully immersed in it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I really want clients to leave their work with me and have that just be a jumping off point, and
Mm,
have it be something where they're able to just, that they feel confident enough to continue to just peel back layer after layer. And of course, if they want to come back and do work together, that's always such an honor to be given the opportunity to continue. But I really am always clear with my clients that they have all the tools, that it's my really only role is to help guide and support and cheerlead.
absolutely. And yeah, I can imagine you'd be amazing at it. So just talking to you is so it's so soothing. And even on your posts on Insta, I love your poems that you share, and then um, your own feelings about the poems or what's going on. It's very thought provoking. Always gets me to really think about what's going on. So yeah, it's awesome.
Thank you. It's such a beautiful platform. And I know that, there's all sorts of things that people can say about social media, but I think it's a beautiful tool if we choose to use it in a really authentic way and really allow ourselves to be vulnerable through it. And that is one of the things I share a lot with my clients is the more we're willing to be really vulnerably authentic and just share our frequency in a really pure, unapologetic way, the more we're going to magnetize the things that are right for us. Because the things that aren't going to be a fit, it's going to be clear when we're being really authentic like that. And so I found that my experience on Instagram has been really lovely, because I do think that's something I feel really lucky to have always had, is sort of a fearlessness around being very authentic in that way.
Mhm.
And it's brought just beautiful connections into my life, because people feel that,
They do.
and people who are seeking that and want to show up in similar ways just show up, and it's magic like that. So
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, I resonate on that one. Do you have any myths that you encounter in your work when it comes to, what you're doing, and yeah, that you like to kind of just educate people about?
I would say the biggest thing I uh, come upon in my work is probably around card readings. Um, and I think there's a lot of, well, first, there's definitely a lot of stigma around people who are doing any sort of intuitive work. I mean, that goes back for ages. I think it ties back into a lot of the stigma around the idea of witches and all of the cultural things that come along with that. Um, and and while there are people, I think, not just in intuitive work, but across any profession, that work not from a place of positive intention, um, I I think that ultimately, people who are working from a really pure hearted place with any sort of intuitive practice or healing practice, um, the idea is to empower the person uh, that they're working with. And so what I notice a lot of times is there's a lot of fear around intuitive work, and the tool that I primarily use is the card readings, but there's been other things that I've worked with.
Mhm.
And I think people have this idea that I'm either going to be able to have some sort of mind control over them, or that I can uh, cast some sort of spell, or especially I think I have people think that anybody who is intuitive is psychic. And I specifically like to make that distinction a lot. That's probably the most common one that I get,
Mhm.
um, where people think that I when they come to sit with me for a card reading, that I can read their minds or that I see their future. And there are some people who have that gift, but it's very rare. And it's a pretty heavy gift to have. I think that most people who have that gift would say that it can be quite burdensome.
Mm.
And that is not a gift that I have. And I truly believe, and I always like to just, put a little disclaimer on this, that
Mm.
for anybody who's listening, if this doesn't resonate with you, I honor this too. But I believe everyone's intuitive. I believe it's our birthright, and it's connected to our animal nature, which I think a lot of times we forget that we are animals.
Mhm.
But in the same way that animals are highly, highly attuned to their surroundings and have this sort of sixth sense of, when a predator is going to happen, or they're
Mm.
able to have a sense about, without having cognition in the way that we do, sense
Mm.
about certain foods and what will support them. To me, I don't think of intuition as much of a magical thing as sort of this lineage of deep, powerful instinct that we can access, and sensitivity.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
and so there's so many different ways that people receive intuitive messaging, and some people get flashes of vision, or some people hear things, or some people feel things in their gut.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that's something that everyone has access to if they choose to connect with it. Whereas being psychic is a very unique, specific type of gift. And when people come to me for readings, sometimes they'll ask, "Okay, tell me what's going to happen
Mm.
with this," and I have to clarify that that's not
Mm.
something that I can do. And honestly, even if I had that gift, I'm not sure that I would feel that it would be ethical to use it in that way. I really believe in free will, and
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
people can leave and make any number of choices when they leave a reading that changes the course of their destiny.
Mhm.
And so even when I read the energy that's present and say it appears that this is what the energies that you're moving through right now, or some of the soul lessons that you're working with, um, that I'm really clear with people that nothing I say is set in stone. That,
Mm.
and also that my gifts are not infallible either. That the way I receive an intuition and interpret it, I'm human, and I interpret it the best I can. But I notice this in my own life as I work with my gifts for myself, that sometimes I believe something means something specific, and I find later on that that was an intuitive message, but I interpret it, maybe there was a little bit of an ego influence in the way that I interpreted it.
Yes, and the what I've really learnt probably in the last few months about ego is it really wants to be noisy at times.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's a bit of a digression, but like the more you start to really commit to aligning with your intuition, the ego, it does all because the intuition is kind of like God's will, or your inner voice, inner guidance, that connection with source, etc. And if people don't feel that way, that's fine. They will have their own interpretation of that. But the more that you start to cultivate and practice really refining that and healing, the separation to to make meaning, the more the ego just wants to keep bringing up stuff, and
Oh,
character
absolutely.
building, isn't it?
And it can be, this is something I speak with clients about a lot, because I think, because of my personal history, I get a lot of clients who uh, work with anxiety as a
Mm.
challenge in their life. And I think especially if you're someone who's prone to anxiety, it can be hard sometimes to tell the difference between what is an anxious hit or an anxious body sensation, what is an
Mm.
intuitive hit. And even still, sometimes I won't be able to tell the difference. And I think the um there's that quote, it's like the more you learn, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know anything, or something. It's
Yep.
something like, I'm really
Or
terrible
you
with
learn the
quotes,
less
but
you know, or something like that.
mhm.
Yeah.
And
So
so, and I think that has been rather than the more I build my intuition, the more sure I feel about things, it's actually the opposite. The more I have cultivated my intuition, the more I feel like there's this openness to the possibility of things not being exactly as I perceive them to be.
Mm. Yeah. That good old perception. Did anyone help you along your journey? I'm always interested to know if people have teachers, or, for some people it could be their parents, or, for some people it could be colliding paths with a teacher of some description. Has anyone helped you along the way?
I feel like I've had really interesting experiences with what I call like human angels in my life, where people sort of pop in very briefly and then exit. I haven't really had much in the way of consistent mentorship across my
Mhm.
life. And there was a point where I was very actively seeking that in teachers when I was doing different kinds of trainings for healing work. And I've come to a place where I've really released this idea that I'm going to have a specific teacher that I follow, and have really opened to um, a sense of absolutely everyone who passes me being able to be a teacher in some way. But with that said, I will say there have been a few people who have been more prominent in my journey. That first alternative healing practitioner um, that I was working with when I was in grad school for some personal health issues, um, you know, it's interesting because I ended up leaving working with her at some point, and there was a point where it was really truly no longer a fit.
Mhm.
But in the time that we worked together, it dramatically shifted the way that I related to myself and my body. And prior to that, I would say I was really in a place of trying to push down anything that wasn't comfortable or convenient. And she really supported me in working at the edge of my ability to sit with things, sit with discomfort, both physical and emotional.
Mhm.
So that was really a profound shift for me. And I actually worked with her for about 7 years.
Mhm.
Um, and then one of my closest friends, who I met actually at that bed and breakfast job when I moved to LA, um, she was on a very similar journey to me. And I would say she was just a little bit ahead of me on the curve.
Mhm.
Um, she was, she is somebody who really has very little concern about societal conventions. And and she was doing things that I had always, I think in the back of my mind, wanted to do, but felt like, who was I to do that?
Mhm.
And while we were working together at the bed and breakfast, she ended up leaving at some point and studying to be a private meditation instructor.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, do people just do that? Like at the time, I grew up in a family where that was very conventional about
Mm.
work,
Mm.
and it just didn't seem like realistic in any sort of way to pursue anything that was off the beaten path.
Mhm.
And so to watch my friend do that, and then she eventually started studying some earth-based and uh, shamanic studies, and healing practices in that area. And it was just so inspiring to me. And she was really generous with sharing her process with me, and allowing me to participate in rituals with her. And it really just sort of helped me get very clear about the fact that that was something that very much lived in my heart, and that I had been saying no to myself for a very long time. So I'm sure there's lots of other people. Also, I would say there's a couple of um, people who I don't know personally, but Pema Chodron,
Mhm.
uh, her several of her books were were really life-changing for me, when I was navigating some of my most difficult times emotionally and with anxiety, and also supported a really big framework shift for me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's interesting that you speak of Buddhism. Like, Buddhism was the beginning of my journey 20 years ago. I went through a crisis at the end of my 20s. Oh, sorry, the beginning of my 20s, end of my teenage years, and just started looking at Buddhism as a way of, I don't know, and like, just, I remember sitting in city gardens, because I lived in the city at the time, just chanting Om Mani Padme Hum over and over in my head, and just really starting that process. So yeah, it's interesting. I feel like we've got so much in common. It's awesome. I really appreciate you sharing this. Yeah. I ask all of my guests if there's like one mantra or affirmation or quote that guides their journey, in those times of challenge. And if you have one, I'd love you if you could share that.
Hmm. There's definitely several that I come back to. And I think I've shared some before, and I'm wanting to take a beat because I feel like there's been one that I've been present with over the last few days, more specifically with some things that I've been navigating, and I'm wanting to hone in on it. Um, hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'll be able to quite bring that one into words. I think the one that I've shared before is just that we're all doing the best we can with what we have, and I I come back to that one a lot, both for myself and with others.
Mm,
And I think especially as somebody who has come from a family with a lot of challenging dynamics within it,
mhm,
that's created a lot more room for acceptance, like really radical acceptance,
mm,
and and I always like to clarify when I talk about that, because I think sometimes to people that means that we're supposed to drop all of our boundaries and not um,
mm,
and just accept whatever happens to us. And it's not really so much about that as about clear seeing and being able to see people and dynamics and circumstances for what they are
mm,
in a very clear, non-judgmental way, and then to make a choice from there about what best serves us, what serves the dynamic, and what serves the broader community around that.
mm,
So I think that you know that has been a big go-to for me. Brene Brown has a section in one of her books where she talks about that, and I remember reading that and just really like having like a deep internal nod, because
yeah.
um, sometimes our best is kind of a crappy best.
Yeah. Yeah.
and 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 to also have compassion with ourselves about that, and the more that we're able to do that, where I feel like we're able to extend that to others too, because I have days where I'm really not my best in the overall frame, but I'm my best for that day.
Yeah.
And to give myself, I can tend to be very, very hard on myself. And I know that because the people in my community who I love and trust reflect that to me regularly.
Yeah.
And so just to remind myself that, even when I feel like I'm floundering a little bit, or feeling lost,
Mm,
or not showing up and speaking my truth in the way that I feel like it's coming out as clear as I'd like it to be, just to just to sort of give myself permission to just be here and be myself, and not hold a standard that I have to be more than I feel capable of being in any given moment. So
and it's a foundation of self-compassion too, isn't it? Really just to really just embrace who you are showing up as right now, if and other people as well. And we all have conditioning, and it's so easy to fall into judgment. And I think just take that moment to pause and breathe, as you said before, just taking that breath. And as Abraham Hicks says, I think it's 17 seconds, isn't it, to just get
Mm.
back into alignment. So, but that 17 seconds is crucial. I find myself these days, if I'm perceiving communication as, because I'm such an empath and super absorber, I'm a bit of both, antenna and disassociation. So
Mhm.
um, I guess, just through conditioning. And so just allowing yourself to count backwards from 17, and then a response to enter the situation. And that's what's getting me through things at the moment. So
Mhm.
I love, I love that, that self-compassion is definitely there for you. Really is, it's kind of crucial, I think, but we're so in such a fast-paced world. I think well, I feel like society is striving all the time and just wanting more, um, and that depletion of energy reserves can come too. So yeah, I love the notion of self-compassion.
I think it also brings, there's something about that um, mantra or that concept that also just, to me, brings me back to what is true for me, and pulls me out of that uh, need to get in alignment with frameworks that aren't mine, frameworks that are put on by society. And I feel like that's what you're alluding to a little bit.
Mm,
And it's, you know, when I start feeling really overwhelmed, really stressed, um, what I've noticed more and more is that I'm trying to live in somebody else's framework. And so when I'm able to catch that and come back and say, if I just gave myself permission to just do what actually feels right to me and be honest about that, how does that shift things? And that takes a lot of courage,
mm,
because a lot of times it does mean going against the grain or doing things that people around us don't understand, or that may not make sense in sort of in the modern framework.
mhm,
Um, but also, I feel like so much of our modern framework is so far from what's natural for us, again, as kind of animal beings.
mm,
Um, that it's more common to have the like disconnection and this constant, the striving that you're talking about. I mean, animals aren't trying to do anything but like make sure that they're meeting their nutritional needs and evading predators. That's all they're really trying to do. And we have all these additional things that we've placed on ourselves. And I think when I was trying to hone in on what that other mantra was for me, I think it's even just that simple. I think it's just be and allow myself to to let go of a little bit of all of the extraneous things that I feel like I'm supposed to be achieving or how I'm supposed to be showing up, and just
mm.
let myself be just a breathing animal body sometimes, and just allow that. And I think that stillness is, I think we're starting to come to recognize the importance of it, but I think for a long time it's really been undervalued. So
Absolutely, and it takes awareness, of your intuitive senses, really. Not being
mhm.
cliche at all, but given the topic of today's conversation, but when you've got that awareness of what you need as an individual, your framework, as you say, and then you're able to have those boundaries in order to promote self-care, it really, it's just a homogenous process, I think. And the more people like yourself can support people to have that awareness of what they need. Yeah, I think it's so imperative.
It definitely feels like a gift to be able to work in that capacity with people, because I think often about what I hope my legacy will be when I'm not on the planet anymore. And I always say I'm not really a professionally ambitious person. I don't have any desire to be super wealthy or super famous or anything like that. But I would say I'm sort of spiritually ambitious, and my hope is just to leave sort of a cascade effect of um, promoting wellness
Mm,
and encouraging. I really think that when we have that framework for ourselves, we also start to think about that more globally too, and it's everything so interconnected.
mm,
Environmental wellness, social wellness, and then our personal well-being. All
mhm.
of these things are, so the more that we start tuning into that, I think it supports a global wellness as well.
Mm,
So to me, I feel like any person that you can touch and create even the tiniest little shift, there's going to be this domino or cascade effect. And
mm.
and um, I think often about how there's been people in my life who've just come in passing, those human angels that I was talking about, that probably have no idea how much of an impact they've made on me, and then they've supported me to bloom in ways where I've been able to go and positively impact other people. And
Mhm.
I have to remind myself sometimes that, when we are able to take care of our own wellness, we also are those human angels for other people in ways that we don't
Yeah,
realize, because we're holding them in that positive, loving energy that we've cultivated internally first. So
absolutely.
yeah.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you so much. I've loved this conversation. You, I think, I sense very strongly that you connected with my path for a reason. And with the human angel factor, I feel like you've helped me tune into slowness, like instead of just because your beautiful desert and ocean photographs, there's always a beautiful thought-provoking comment behind them, and it really makes me slow down and really think because on
Mhm.
Insta we're so able to just scroll and double tap, and if you just like the image, but a lot of people like yourself, like, put a lot of time and energy into that thought-provoking comment behind the image, and that's one thing that you've helped me realize is to slow down a bit, really absorb the meaning of your feeling when you took that photo, and the feelings that you're putting out into the world, and then tune into my own physical body and what I need at that time. So I'm so grateful we connected, and I'm really appreciative for you coming on today, Ashley.
That's truly like one of the most beautiful compliments that I could receive. And I am so glad to hear um, that it's landing with you. And I hope other people as well in that way. And this has been such a beautiful experience, both connecting with you online as we have over the last handful of months, and then this conversation today. So I'm really grateful that you reached out, and um, definitely look forward to seeing. I do feel like we're on these very parallel journeys, and we'll look forward to seeing how we continue to sort of uh, grow in sync in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if our lovely listeners would like to explore your beautiful Insta vibes and see the beautiful desert and ocean images, how can they best connect with you?
So on Instagram, I'm at Hello Ashley Berry, and I am always available to be connected directly with by email. I'm really open at connecting with anybody in my community that's curious about whether they're wanting to know about my offerings or just have questions about intuitive practices. So I really encourage people to reach out to me by email if they're interested in doing that. And my email address is helloashleyberry@gmail.com. And then for anybody who's curious about my offerings or my background or my philosophy around my work that I share with clients, all of that information is available on my website, which is
Mhm.
www.helloashleyberry.com.
Awesome. And I'll pop links to all in the show notes to everything. And yeah, I'm so grateful for you being here today. And I trust that our listeners enjoyed this episode of the Gut Mind Collective podcast. And be sure to subscribe using your favorite pod player so you catch any future episodes. And feel free to connect with us online at thegutmindcollective.com. Goodbye for now.